I knew something was terribly wrong the moment I saw the lake's waterline dropping day by day. I warned the HOA again and again that their reckless draining would destroy the entire ecosystem, but they laughed it off like I was exaggerating. What happened next turned their arrogance into a public disaster no one could deny. From the very beginning, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. The lake had always been the heart of the community, a calm stretch of water reflecting the sky, surrounded by trees, wildlife, and walking paths. Families gathered there on weekends, kids fed the ducks, and residents took pride in calling it their natural gem. But slowly, something changed. The waterline began retreating from the shore, inch by inch, day after day. At first, most people assumed it was seasonal. I didn't. I noticed it because I paid attention. I walked that lake almost every morning. I knew where the water usually reached, where the reeds grew thickest, and where fish gathered near the edges. When those familiar markers started disappearing, alarm bells went off in my head. This wasn't normal evaporation. This wasn't a dry spell. Something was actively wrong. After asking around, I discovered the truth. The HOA had authorized partial draining of the lake. Their justification was vague: maintenance, future improvements, and cost-saving measures. No detailed plan was shared. No timeline. No environmental assessment. Just a quiet decision made behind closed doors. I brought my concerns directly to the HOA board. At the first meeting, I came prepared. I had photos showing the waterline from previous years compared to current levels. I had notes from a local environmental consultant who explained how artificial draining could destabilize the lakebed. I even had documentation explaining how sudden water loss could kill aquatic life and permanently damage the ecosystem. The response: smirks, eye rolls, dismissive laughter. One board member leaned back in his chair and said, "It's just water. It'll come back." Another laughed and added, "You're not a scientist. We know what we're doing." That moment set the tone for everything that followed. Instead of addressing the evidence, the HOA chose arrogance. They treated concern as rebellion, questions as disrespect, warnings as personal attacks. Their focus wasn't on the lake, it was on maintaining control and saving face. I didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, the water dropped faster. The shoreline cracked. Mud replaced what used to be shallow water. Fish were visibly stressed, gasping near shrinking pools. Birds stopped nesting near the edges. The signs were no longer subtle, they were screaming. I emailed the HOA again, attaching updated photos and videos. I cited environmental guidelines. I explained that once a lake dries past a certain threshold, refilling it doesn't restore life, it creates a dead basin. I urged them to pause the draining immediately. Their reply was short and condescending. "Your concerns are noted. No action is required." That sentence still makes my blood boil. They didn't just ignore the evidence. They rejected responsibility. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and spoke in front of residents. I explained what was happening in simple terms. I showed photos. I warned that if the draining continued, the lake could be permanently damaged, or destroyed. The board interrupted me. They accused me of causing panic. They claimed I was spreading misinformation. They insisted everything was under control. Then one board member laughed and said, "If the lake dries up, I'll buy you a bottle of water." The room laughed with him. That laughter became their downfall. Because reality doesn't care about authority titles or meeting votes. As weeks passed, the damage accelerated. Algae bloomed aggressively due to stagnant, shallow water. Dead fish began washing up along the edges, their silver bodies stark against drying mud. The smell became noticeable, then unavoidable. Residents started asking questions. Parents complained that the lake was unsafe. Walkers avoided the path because of the stench. Wildlife vanished. What was once a scenic centerpiece turned into an environmental wound. Suddenly, the HOA's tone shifted, but only slightly. They issued a vague notice blaming unexpected conditions. No apology. No admission of error. No acknowledgement of the warnings they had mocked. Behind the scenes, I learned even more. The HOA had skipped proper permits. They had ignored state environmental guidelines. They never consulted a hydrologist. Their decision was driven entirely by cost-cutting and convenience. Pride had replaced responsibility. And pride is expensive. I contacted environmental agencies. I submitted documentation, emails, photos, timelines. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult. I simply presented facts. Investigations began quietly. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down. Instead of stopping the draining, they accelerated it, hoping to finish quickly, before scrutiny intensified. That decision sealed the lake's fate. The water dropped to a fraction of its original level. Then one morning, I arrived and saw it, dry earth where water once shimmered. The lake was no longer a lake. It was a scar. No laughter. No jokes. Just silence. Residents gathered along the edge, staring in disbelief. Phones came out. Photos spread online. The community that once trusted the WA now questioned everything. And suddenly, the board wanted meetings. Emergency meetings. They talked about restoration. They talked about unexpected outcomes. They talked about moving forward. But they never talked about accountability. Until the consequences arrived. Fines. Legal notices. Insurance disputes. Public embarrassment. Property values dropped. What they thought was a small decision became a community-wide disaster. All because they dismissed evidence. All because they chose pride over responsibility. I didn't feel victory. I felt frustration. This didn't have to happen. The lake could have been saved. The damage was preventable. The warnings were clear. The evidence was solid. But arrogance is louder than reason, until consequences speak. And when they finally did, the WA had nothing left to laugh about. The change did not happen all at once. That was the most dangerous part. If the lake had vanished overnight, alarms would have sounded immediately. Emergency meetings would have been called. Accountability might have followed. But instead, the damage crept in slowly, disguising itself as inconvenience rather than catastrophe. At first, residents noticed small things. Morning walkers mentioned that the shoreline felt farther away. Joggers complained that the air smelled off. Parents told their kids not to play near the water anymore because the edges looked muddy and unstable. Still, most people trusted the HOA's silence. If something were truly wrong, surely the board would say something, right? They didn't. The water level continued to fall. By the second month, the lake no longer looked like a lake. The shallow edges had transformed into exposed mudflats, cracked like broken pottery. What once gently lapped against stone now sat meters away, trapped in shrinking pools. The natural gradient of the shoreline was gone, replaced by uneven trenches carved by careless draining. Then came the fish. At first, it was just one or two, floating near the edges, motionless. Someone snapped a photo and posted it to the community group. The WA dismissed it as natural loss. But nature doesn't kill selectively. Within days, more fish appeared. Some were small, some large. Some lay half buried in mud, others stranded in isolated puddles that baked under the sun. Residents watched helplessly as fish gasped for oxygen in water that had become too shallow and too warm to sustain life. The smell followed soon after. A sour, rotting odor spread through the air, strongest in the mornings and evenings. It clung to clothes. It seeped into homes near the shoreline. Windows stayed closed. Walkers avoided the path entirely. This was no longer cosmetic damage. This was ecological collapse. Birds that once nested near the water vanished. Frogs stopped croaking at night. Insects swarmed unnaturally over stagnant pools. Algae bloomed aggressively, turning the remaining water thick and green, choking out what little oxygen remained. Residents started asking questions, loudly. Emails flooded the WA inbox. Posts filled community forums. People demanded explanations. Parents worried about health risks. Property owners feared declining home values. What was once a point of pride had become a liability. The WA finally responded. Their statement was short, carefully worded, and completely empty. They blamed unexpected environmental conditions. They assured residents that monitoring was ongoing. They advised people to avoid the shoreline temporarily. Not once did they admit fault. Not once did they acknowledge the warnings. Not once did they stop the draining. By now, the damage had crossed a critical threshold. Lakes are not bathtubs. You cannot simply refill them and expect life to return. Once the sediment dries, cracks, and oxidizes, the biological foundation collapses. Microorganisms die. Plant roots fail. The lakebed hardens into a sterile surface. Residents didn't know this yet, but they felt it. Children asked why the ducks were gone. Elderly residents complained of headaches from the smell. Real estate agents quietly warned sellers that listings near the lake would be challenging. Still, the WA clung to denial. Behind closed doors, they argued about optics, not solutions. Emails later revealed that board members worried more about public perception than restoration. Their priority was damage control, not damage prevention. Meanwhile, the lake continued dying in plain sight. One afternoon, a group of residents gathered at the shoreline. Someone had brought a shovel. They dug just inches into the exposed mud, revealing how dry and cracked the sediment had become. This wasn't temporary exposure. This was dehydration at depth. Photos spread rapidly online. Local attention followed. Questions were raised beyond the community. Environmental advocates reached out. City officials began making inquiries. The HOA's silence, once ignored, now looked suspicious. That's when panic set in. The HOA attempted a cosmetic fix. They brought in machinery to redistribute remaining water, hoping to make the lake look fuller. The result was disastrous. Mud was churned up, releasing trapped gases and intensifying the stench. More fish died overnight. Residents woke up furious. This wasn't mismanagement anymore. This was negligence. Emergency meetings were called, but not announced publicly. Select residents were invited. Others were excluded. Rumors spread faster than facts. Trust eroded completely. At one such meeting, an HOA representative finally admitted something critical. They had underestimated the consequences. That single sentence confirmed everything. They had drained without a plan. They had ignored expert advice. They had dismissed residents' concerns. And now, the damage was no longer reversible. Attempts to stop the draining came too late. The lakebed had already passed the recovery point. Even if water were reintroduced, the ecosystem would not simply restart. Restoration would require years, millions of dollars, and regulatory oversight. Residents demanded resignations. The HOA deflected. They blamed contractors. They blamed weather. They blamed miscommunication. But accountability cannot be outsourced. As the weeks passed, the lake became a symbol, not just of environmental damage, but of institutional arrogance. Every dead fish was evidence. Every cracked inch of mud was a receipt. People stopped laughing. They stopped trusting. They stopped believing reassurances. What replaced it was anger. Anger at being ignored. Anger at being lied to. Anger at watching something irreplaceable destroyed for convenience. By the time the HOA finally halted all activity, the lake was effectively gone. What remained was a shallow, foul-smelling basin unfit for wildlife, recreation, or restoration without massive intervention. And everyone knew it. This wasn't a temporary setback. This was permanent damage. The community had crossed the point of no return, not because of ignorance, but because warnings were dismissed until proof arrived in the form of death, decay, and loss. The lake didn't just dry up. It exposed everything. The day the lake officially died was not dramatic at first. There was no explosion, no sirens, no immediate announcement. Just silence, heavy, uncomfortable silence, where water used to exist. The sun rose that morning and reflected off cracked earth instead of rippling blue. Birds circled once, confused, then flew away. The lake was gone. Completely. What remained was a vast stretch of dry, fractured ground, scarred with deep fissures like a broken mirror. The smell that had lingered for weeks now intensified, a mix of rot, sulfur, and decay. The final pools of water evaporated under relentless heat, leaving behind dead fish, hardened algae, and lifeless mud. Residents gathered along the edge, staring in disbelief. Phones came out. Photos were taken. Videos were recorded. And within hours, what the HOA had tried so desperately to downplay became impossible to hide. The images spread through social media, community forums, and local groups faster than any official statement ever could. This was a lake, one caption read. HOA disaster, another said. How did this happen? People asked. The mockery that once filled HOA meetings was gone. Replaced by panic. Behind closed doors, the HOA board scrambled. Emergency emails were sent back and forth. Lawyers were contacted. Contractors were blamed. Everyone spoke at once, but no one took responsibility. Their first move was denial. They released a statement claiming the lake's condition was temporary, and that restoration efforts were underway. But residents could see with their own eyes, there was nothing temporary about cracked earth stretching for acres. You don't restore life to dust with a press release. The statement backfired. Residents were furious. They responded with evidence, screenshots of ignored emails, recordings of meetings where warnings were mocked, timelines showing exactly when the draining accelerated. What had once been whispered concerns now became documented negligence. And documentation is dangerous. Local media picked up the story. Reporters arrived, cameras rolling, microphones pointed at HOA representatives who suddenly had nothing to say. When asked why environmental guidelines were ignored, they deflected. When asked who approved the draining, they contradicted each other. When asked why residents' warnings were dismissed, they went silent. That silence spoke louder than any excuse. Then came the authorities. Environmental agencies launched formal investigations. Inspectors walked the dried lakebed, taking samples, measuring damage, documenting destruction. Their conclusions were brutal. The lake's ecosystem had collapsed entirely due to unauthorized and mismanaged draining. Violations were cited. Permits had not been obtained. Impact assessments were skipped. Warnings were ignored. The HOA's negligence was no longer an opinion, it was a finding. Fines followed. Heavy ones. Each violation carried penalties, and they stacked quickly. Insurance providers refused coverage, citing gross mismanagement. Restoration estimates reached into the millions, far beyond what the HOA's budget could handle. Special assessments were proposed. Residents were told they might have to pay for the HOA's mistakes. That was the breaking point. Community meetings turned explosive. Residents demanded resignations. Some shouted. Others cried. Many threatened legal action. The trust that once existed between homeowners and the HOA was completely destroyed. Multiple lawsuits were filed. Homeowners sued for loss of property value. Environmental groups sued for ecological damage. Former board members faced personal liability claims. What began as arrogance had evolved into legal chaos. Board members resigned, quietly, one by one. Some moved away. Others hired personal attorneys. The HOA, once confident and untouchable, was now fractured and desperate. Public backlash intensified. Online reviews labeled the community mismanaged. Prospective buyers backed out. Realtors warned clients away. Properties near the former lake lost significant value almost overnight. The dried lake became a symbol of failure. Not just environmental failure, but leadership failure. Residents no longer asked, "How could this happen?" They asked, "Who let this happen?" And the answer was painfully clear. The same people who laughed. The same people who mocked warnings. The same people who believed authority mattered more than accountability. Attempts at damage control continued, but each one made things worse. Proposals to refill the lake were rejected by regulators. Artificial liners were deemed insufficient. Experts confirmed what had been feared all along. The lake, as it once existed, was gone forever. What could be built in its place would be artificial, expensive, and heavily regulated. And nothing would erase the truth. The HOA had been warned. In the end, the lake didn't just dry up water, it drained credibility, trust, and power. The laughter that once echoed through meetings was replaced by court dates, financial audits, and public shame. Residents learned a harsh lesson. When leadership refuses to listen, consequences listen instead. The HOA learned a harsher one. Authority without responsibility is temporary. As months passed, weeds grew where water once flowed. The community adapted, but it never forgot. The dried lakebed remained a daily reminder of what arrogance costs, and how preventable disaster always is, until it isn't. The warnings had been clear. The evidence had been real. The outcome had been inevitable. And when the lake finally disappeared, it took the HOA's illusion of control with it.